Hey everybody, this is Shannon from Pish Posh Reselling. Today we're going to be talking about rubylane.com. And just a little background, I've been an online reseller for about 15 years, a little bit longer than that. And over those 15 years, I have sold or am still selling on lots of different platforms. So I've sold on eBay, Amazon, Etsy, Poshmark, Depop, Rubylane. Back in the day, I sold a little bit on Bonanza, even sold on it before they were called Bonanza. They were called Bonanzal, if any of you old timers remember that one. A little bit on Facebook Marketplace and things like that. I had a vintage booth for a while in the little town that I lived in. So I've sold on lots of different platforms and lots of different places. And like I said, today we're going to talk about Rubylane. Now, a lot of you maybe haven't heard of it, or you've heard of it and had some ideas about it. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about what it's like to sell on Rubylane, just information about it, fees and things like that, and just help you make a decision whether you should add Rubylane to your list of platforms that you sell on if you sell vintage. So as a disclosure, I know my thumbnail and my description of this video talked about leaving Etsy to sell on Rubylane, and it's true to a certain degree. I have full disclosure, I do still have 2 shops on Etsy, but they're very specific niches or niches. So if you saw my, in my description, I have a list of all the places that I'm currently selling on. So I do have an Etsy shop still for sewing patterns. And then I have one that used to be my main vintage site. And now I'm switching it over to be mostly vintage flatware. So I've just decided to focus on that. Now all my main vintage and all the general vintage that I find for the most part is going on Rubylane. And so I'm not selling vintage on Etsy anymore. So that's what that meant as far as leaving Etsy to go to Rubylane. So I just want to say I don't hate Etsy. There's some things I don't like about it, but that's also true of any platform that you sell on. There's going to be things that you like and things that you don't like. I don't like some of the changes that they've made, that Etsy made. I don't like how their search engine works. I feel even as a buyer going in there, it's very hard to find what you're looking for. If you're searching for vintage, they've allowed a whole lot of not vintage to be listed and sold there. There's a lot of fake vintage from China. There's no control over it. So those are some changes that I really don't appreciate about Etsy that are not an issue on Rubylane. So the listing process on Etsy is a little bit longer. I've never really liked having to fill in all those tags, at least the way that they have it set up. And yeah, probably that main issue was just all the non-vintage that's allowed in there. I know Etsy was, most people's minds, it was set up for handmade, but vintage has been allowed on Etsy as far as I can remember. I sold vintage on there starting in 2007 or even 2006. And I'm pretty sure vintage has been allowed on there all along, but it's definitely, they focus on handmade and they don't give a lot of attention to vintage in their marketing and things like that. So, I'll tell you a little bit later more of my backstory about my experience selling on Rubylane, and we'll go into that, why I've been having a better experience with Rubylane and selling vintage on there. So this is going to be the first video in a series of videos about selling on Rubylane. There's really just too much for one video, so I decided to break it up like this. So today we'll just talk about general information. I've got some slides that I had made up earlier in the year for another presentation I had done on Rubylane. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll take a tour of the site, and I can let you see into my shop and then just some features on the site itself. So in the future, the next video will most likely talk about opening up a shop, and it'll talk about the listing process of getting items listed for sale, more of the nitty-gritty about those type of things, how you handle photos and things like that. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you want to know more about listing on Ruby Lane. We'll get into more detail in future videos. So if we go back to just my backstory, so one of the misconceptions about selling on Ruby Lane we'll talk about was that everyone thought, well, it was expensive. In the past, it was more expensive to sell on Ruby Lane. And so during that time period, it was back in 2018. I had known about Ruby Lane for a long time. I had known other people who sell there, but I just felt like I couldn't afford it. It was just not, I didn't feel like my things would fit on that site. And so I just kind of had it in the back of my head. Well, a few years back, they had an initial setup fee, and every once in a while they would have a month where they would waive the setup fee in an attempt to get more sellers onto the site. And so one of those months, it was back in 2018, they were waiving the setup fee, and I said, you know what, let me just try this. I've never tried it before. So I'll admit, I mean, I'm always selling in a bunch of different places. I'm not happy unless all my eggs are in way too many baskets. And so I didn't give it a ton of attention, but I did list quite a few things. And back then there was a fee that was like $60 or $70 that you paid up front for the month. And then you were just hoping your sales made up for that. Well, I think I was only open a couple months, and I sold like one thing. I sold like one necklace that basically paid for my month. And I was like, okay, I didn't have the time to really push and promote and all the things that I thought I needed to do. And so I said, you know what? I don't think I can do this. And so I closed the shop. So that was 2018. So I was only open, like I said, for a couple of months. Well, then what happened was 2021, in the same time, I'm not feeling super happy with Etsy and just different changes that things had made. We played around with, well, let's just put all our all our vintage onto eBay and see how that goes. And I don't know, it feels nice to have like a vintage shop that you're actually shopping for. And I was working on the sewing pattern. It was during the pandemic. The sewing pattern sales were doing really well on Etsy. But I still buy vintage. I love to buy and sell and research vintage. So I wanted to find a better home for those things. So in 2021, Ruby Lane announced that they were overhauling their whole fee structure. And I took a look at what they were offering, and I thought, they sent me an email. They were trying to get some people who had sold there before back, and they invited me back. And so it was July 2021, I went ahead and applied to open a shop on Ruby Lane. And I've been selling there ever since. So I remember once my shop opened, within a couple days, I had sales right away. And so I was looking at some of my numbers. So just to kind of give myself an idea too. So 2021, I didn't open until July. So it was about half a year. And again, I was still only working it just kind of part-time in the sense that I was still listing on eBay and patterns and like all these other things that I was doing. So that first year, half a year, I sold $1,414, and that's just goods. That doesn't include the shipping. And the percentage that it gave me, or the information it gave me in my stats, was that the cost to sell on Ruby Lane compared to my sales was 11.5%. So not too bad. So then this year, what is it? It's already November. Again, I work at it sometimes in surges. I get a bunch listed, and then, it kind of falls by the wayside. And then I list a bunch of stuff. So we'll talk more about that later on in the video. But this year so far, I've made $3,628 on Ruby Lane. And the cost compared to sales was 12.8%. So the fees and things like that of my sales was 12.8%. Now the number I have listed at the moment is about 250. Hovers right around there, and I don't think I get much higher than that or much lower. I kind of seem to maintain right around 250 listings. I would like to increase that, and that's in my plan for the upcoming few months. So looking back at what my average sales were for my vintage shop on Etsy, taking into consideration that it's just me. There were times off and on where my husband was listing too, but he's had times where he's had his own Etsy shop. So it wasn't like he was working on my Etsy shop. But I'm really close after a year and a half of partial effort to matching the sales that I made on Etsy. So that's really promising. And it happened a lot faster than I expected. And especially since Ruby Lane is a bit of a smaller marketplace, I think, than Etsy. So, but selling on other venues, it's just me. You know, eBay has always been our main income for reselling. And Etsy, my main Etsy shop would always sell about half of what I would make on eBay. And so I'm getting close to those numbers with Ruby Lane. So that's very encouraging. So anyway, what I thought I would do is go ahead now and go into some of the slides that kind of get into more of the details about Ruby Lane. There's enough of my backstory, but I just wanted you to know where I was coming from with this and how long I've been on the site and what kind of experience I've had. So let's go ahead and start looking at the site itself. We're going to be talking about Ruby Lane, obviously. So let's just start off by talking about what is Ruby Lane. So it's a marketplace, obviously. It's rubylane.com, and it's a niche marketplace that's just focuses on antiques, vintage, art, collectibles, and jewelry. And if maybe you hadn't heard about it, but it has been around since 1998. So should you sell on Ruby Lane? Should you add it to your maybe collection of marketplaces? If you love antiques and vintage, it might be a good fit for you. If you can list at least 15 true vintage items a month, and we'll talk about the reason for that later. But if you can be consistently selling in your or listing items into your shop, then that would be great. Again, working on your shop consistently, it helps to build a following. If you're willing to do that kind of work, it would be a great place. It's not a great list it and forget it kind of place, but honestly, I don't know many sites that are like that anymore anyway. If you appreciate a curated site with high standards. So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Etsy and how a lot of non-vintage vintage is being let in and things like that. So Ruby Lane is only vintage, and they control it, and they vet all their sellers, and they don't allow those things to happen, right? So when shoppers come in, they know they're only getting vintage, antique, collectible type things. So you also have to be able to take really good, clear photos, describe your items thoroughly, accurately, and again, that's going to make you a good seller on any of the sites that you're in. Now, this is an interesting one. A lot of people have gotten away from PayPal, so you do have to have a PayPal business account in order to sell on Ruby Lane. PayPal is their payment processor, and then the business account, they had to make that a requirement once they started collecting sales tax for us. So I don't know the ins and outs exactly, but a PayPal business account is what will collect and remit the sales tax for you. So then some Ruby Lane misconceptions. So a lot of these misconceptions I had for years had thought about, and I've come to realize that a lot of it was not necessarily true. Might have been true in the past. Maybe that's what the deal was, but it's changed a lot over the years. So a lot of people think that, Ruby Lane, if they've ever been on it, it's expensive stuff, it's all antiques. I mean, sometimes you look at their marketing and yes, they show a lot of the fancy high price things. But if you look over at the fact column, many sales on that site, mine included, are just vintage. They sell for $25 to $50. Obviously, sometimes less, sometimes more. But just average vintage items. And more, I'm selling mid-century items. Now, Ruby Lane is not one that you think of. Even when I find mid-century modern or mid-century things, my brain still goes to Etsy first. But I have been selling more and more of that type of thing on Ruby Lane as well, and more people are listing those types of items, not just fancy, tea party type items or things like that. So then the next misconception that people have is that it's too expensive to set up shop and list on there. So maybe years ago they looked into selling on there, and yes, the fee structure was a lot different and it was more expensive to list there. But like I mentioned in my introduction, last year they had a major fee overhaul and now the fees are very reasonable. And then the other thought is that, well, Ruby Lane, I've barely heard of it. How does anyone know about it? No one's ever going to find my items. So it is a smaller marketplace. They do optimize listings for Google. So I know a lot of buyers find an item on Google and come in and just purchase that way. And it's very easy to shop there. The other thing is that the customer base is very loyal. So like I mentioned before about building a following, if you slowly work on building a following, I've had several repeat customers now, and we'll talk about some of the features later that lets buyers know when you've listed some new things. And the customer base is loyal. So a lot of, even though you've got more and more people coming in off of Google, which is great, but once people are there, they like the site and they kind of just stay there. As far as when they're shopping for vintage items, that's going to be the first place that they look, right? So a lot of the really successful Ruby Lane sellers I know, they have really good followings and loyal customers, and so they may list a bunch of items at once. When they do their couple times a week, they list a bunch of items, and some items just get snatched up immediately because the people who follow them are waiting for these new items to come out. So that's kind of exciting. So the question everybody wants to know, so how much does it cost? Okay, so there's no setup fee. There's no listing fee anymore. You pay a service fee, which is 9.9% based on the purchase order total, which doesn't include sales tax. And then the most that you would pay is $250. That's, 9.9%. That means you sold something really, really big. Anyway, so in the where it's a little bit tricky is that at the beginning of every month, you are charged a maintenance fee of $25, which is for listing unlimited items. Your first month is free when you open, but then if you list at least 15 items during the month, you'll get a rebate of $25. Okay, so it's basically a maintenance fee is charged, and then as soon as you list your 15th item, that $25 comes back to you. So I think it's really smart because it keeps the marketplace very active, and they're kind of ensuring that they're getting fresh items for their customer base. And it kind of takes away from just maybe someone who just wants to park their stuff on there and then they're not active and they're not interactive with their customers. And so it's easy. There's been, like, in the last year and a half that I've been selling, I think maybe once or twice I didn't get to do this. I didn't get to list my 15 items. I think, I don't know, sickness, vacation, something like that. But if you can plan it well enough, then it, you listing the 15 items is really not that difficult. So that was a great overhaul, and that definitely put the fees on par with a lot of the other sites, and so it made me more willing to give it a try. The return policy is site-wide. A shopper can return an item for any reason and by notifying the shop, but they have to do it within 3 days of delivery. And it's a very fast and easy process. I have had no returns at all in a year and a half. I'll just say that. So within 3 days, they have to notify you. And then once you as a seller says, okay, I acknowledge the return, then the buyer has 3 days only to ship the item back to you. So there's accountability on both sides. The buyer can't just like 10 days later say, you know what, I don't really like this. And the buyer can't dilly-dally when they're supposed to ship things back. And then the buyer pays to ship it back. So, but it still is a return policy. It's still an option. And obviously if you misrepresented something or you know, it was broken or something you didn't notice, then I'm sure you can arrange different types of refunds and shipments depending on the situation. So it just promotes buyer confidence, which makes buyers come back. Okay, so just a few little statistics about Ruby Lane. We'll go through these pretty quickly, and then we'll get on to like a tour of the site itself. So this was just interesting. I was trying to find these charts. I had found these charts when I made up this presentation back in the spring. And I like real quick looked on Ruby Lane again. And I don't know if they got rid of them or if I'm just not looking in the right place, but I'll keep looking if anybody's interested. It's just kind of an overview of the type of, I forgot the word for this, but anyway, the type of shoppers that we get on Ruby Lane. So as you can see, there's more women shopping than men. I have had quite a few male customers. The age is a little bit older than 45 is the majority, I would say. You know, some of this stuff isn't that important. They must have taken the survey, how long people have been collecting, and it's people who've been collecting vintage and antiques for more than 5 years. Until there was an interruption, but I had to go answer the door and sign for the UPS guy. So I am back. I think we were just talking about some of these statistics. People who are long-term collectors have our 91% of the shoppers on here. And then just kind of an average household income for most buyers on Ruby Lane it's over $59,000. So I don't know, some things that you might find interesting. Now, I thought this was interesting. 63% of buyers on Ruby Lane spend over $60, less than $200 per transaction. So that's actually pretty good. So I would say it's a serious group of buyers on Ruby Lane. And then there's just a few more stats on this. This again was back in the spring. I couldn't find this page again, so they might have redone it and taken this off of here, but page views, 10 million visits or page views per month and 1.7 million visitors per month. So just to give you an idea of the size of the website. I don't know how this compares to other sites. So another important question is, what are you allowed to sell on Ruby Lane? So obviously antiques, collectibles, vintage, and art. The art needs to be authenticated, has to be signed. There's more information about requirements in each section. And then dolls, jewelry, can be vintage and antique jewelry, and it can be artisan jewelry, so it doesn't have to be older, but then the artisan has its own requirements as well. So they call each category is called a lane, and so each lane has its own listing requirements. So here's an example. Well, sorry, this is, as you can tell, it was spring. This is a screenshot of the page, and so you can see across this yellow box, you can see the different categories of things that you can list, or that they kind of break it down to. So antiques, art, furniture, jewelry, fashion, dolls, glass, porcelain, pottery, and silver. So the listing requirements example now, yep, fashion. Okay, for a second there, I couldn't remember saying fashion, but fashion is there. So here's one example. So in the antiques lane, you can only list things that are 100 years old. And if you have to list, they have to be worth at least $50 to be in that category. And they have like smaller subsets, like antique postcards can be there, but they have to be listed for at least $10. And in at least one photo, you need to see the maker's marks. So like I said before, a lane is just another word for category. So say you do have an antique, which I've sold things that were antique, but they're not worth as much as $50. Like it's only worth $30. You just go ahead and put it in the vintage lane and it's fine. Here's another example, the collectibles lane. You have to have a $5 minimum on these. You can't sell reproductions. And you can do more modern collectibles if they are true collectibles, memorabilia, and if you know the year, you should give the year. So there's too many to mention now to go through all the different requirements. So I think it's probably best, yep, here's the page on the home page. This is where you can find listing requirements. And actually, let's switch over to looking at the site live, and we can explore some of these things better. rubylane.com. This is the home page. Right at the top, we've just got a banner talking about a sale that's going on right now site-wide. It's totally optional to be involved in it, and you can't ever put your whole store in these sales, but I think you can put up to half of your items in any of the Ruby Red tag sales that they offer. So right now I just have a few items in there. I've sold a few. It's a really long duration sale, and so people bought what they wanted to right away, I think. So anyway, so if we go down, like I showed you before, we have the different categories. They're in a little bit of a different order than the screenshot I showed you. They do some advertising. That's their tag sale. They have the collector's hotspot. You can see the white background is, especially when they're marketing on one page, they give everybody a white background, but they do remove the backgrounds, and that is something that they do for you. And so that's kind of a nice feature. We've got new arrivals, on sale, what's trending, which I should really look around at that because that's always good research. There's a section about real or repro, give some tips on that. And then you can shop by category. So there's a whole lot of different types of subjects. They've kind of broken it down to, yeah, you just kind of browse around in there. So you can sign up for their email list. And then it's advertising about selling on Ruby Lane. So clicking on that will take you to some information about selling. And there's that fee information that we just talked about. And then this is my browsing history, which is funny because it's all my own items that I haven't been browsing much lately. I've just been working. Okay, so yeah, so that's the whole first home page. So as far as let's see, where do we want to start? Let's just pop over here real quick, just so you know that there's some drop-down menus over here. So under shop, there are some fun things here. There's today's arrivals. So these are all the newly newly listed items on the site. So let me just show you something with this. Today's arrivals. And we can see in each category how many items were listed in each one. Jewelry is top, dolls are second. That's totally not surprising. So jewelry and dolls are two of the probably biggest categories on here. And that being said, I have, even with competition, I have sold quite a bit of jewelry on here, just average $15, $20 pieces. And then dolls, it's not my favorite category to sell in. So you do see a lot of dolls on here, and the doll collectors do like this site. So if you do have anything I've had that's kind of remotely related to dolls, I try to put on here, and it seems to sell pretty well. If, as long as they're vintage or antique. So what it defaults to is best match. So that might have to do with some of the promoting that people, or the, what do you call it? The kind of, you can pay for promotion, right? So I don't pay anything. And so the best match might have to do with how many people have looked at these items, or, whether the people are paying to promote them. So I always switch it to most recent. And then you can see the latest items that were listed, and you can see the store underneath. Like I said, it's just all white background that they do when they put them on these pages. Each store itself, even though they remove the background of the first image for you, you can choose your background that all of your items in your store look like. So my background is like a gray, a light gray. But when my item is on this page, then it shows up as white. So these are the latest items. Now what's interesting about this, and why it's kind of fun to come here, is this helps you do some research. Now, one thing I want to say, okay, you're looking at my screen. I'm signed in, and you can see the prices, right? Let me show you what I was going to show you first, because that'll make more sense. Sorry, I have to scroll really far down because I have it set to like 180 items per page. So if you go to the end of these pages, and we're not there yet. Oh, here we go. You can see the items in the last 24 hours that were listed and have sold already. Okay, so it starts right here. So this kind of gives you an idea of the items that sell quickly. And now you can still see the sale price because I'm signed in. So it might be worth it when you're taking a look at Ruby Lane to go ahead and register. Because if you're signed in, you don't even have to register as a seller. You can just register in general, and that'll give you, once you're signed in, you're able to see sold prices, if that makes sense. Okay, so here's a bunch of the ones that have sold in the last 24 hours. So they were listed and sold within that 24 hours. So again, we see some dolls. Dolls are always doing good. There's a little bit of jewelry, but we see there's actually quite a bit of variety. Dolls and jewelry, dolls and jewelry. And some fabric, sewing fabric, other odds and ends. Yeah, so Christmas decorations, things like that. So yes, you will see a lot of dolls and jewelry, but those are the biggest collectors. And so they're the ones who are going to be watching the new listings very closely. Okay, so that's what's sold so far today. So that's just kind of fun to take a look at that. And then what you can do, if you want to, under that shop tab, let's see, let's get that open again. You can do this week's arrivals, and you can look at the whole week's worth. Okay, so then they have monthly finds is a newsletter that they send out, and you can submit one item to be in monthly finds, and your item will get promoted in a lot of the marketing that Ruby Lane does. You just have to remember to submit an item for that. Then if we click on the Sell tab, we've got Shop Owner's Home, which is once you've opened a shop. That's where I'll show you that in a minute, but that's where all the links to all the stuff you need is in Shop Owner's Home. Here's the Join Ruby Lane and information about joining Ruby Lane. Listing requirements is what we were talking about in that previous segment. So if we just click on that real quick, we can follow up on that. So each lane, each category has their requirements. And so you can do research on that. On, if you know that you sell a bunch of fashion, then you could, as you're researching whether you want to sell on Ruby Lane, you can click on the fashion one and see what the requirements are for selling fashion on Ruby Lane. So that's where you would find that, under the Sell tab. And then, of course, it's always good to know where the FAQs are. And so here's a whole list of some of those. And fees and payments. So that's the information about how to set all that up that we talked about earlier, the fee requirements. And then Relax is just kind of a fun, like what's selling is kind of like what we were just looking at. It's just more general. So it's still set for most recent, but you can just kind of look through and see what's selling. But what's neat about this is that you can go and you can check, let's say, kitchenware. You can do it by category. So I like to poke around and see what kind of kitchenware has been selling, because I do sell a lot of that. Okay, so let's take a look. We'll go over to this section right here. So this is my shop, and I can click View My Shop. And I am Pish Posh Vintage on Ruby Lane. So right at the top of your shop, you have a scrolling banner with some of your newest items that you've listed. It's actually all my items. If you sit here long enough, I think all of them go through. So you can have your little avatar type thing here, a little welcome message. There's About Us over here. You can click. And then right here, people, if they're looking at your shop, they can see what your newest items are. They can click straight to that. And then right here, they have the categories that your items are found in. So I have probably mostly jewelry and then kitchenware. Then porcelain and pottery. Dolls is way down over here. So like I said, it says right here that I have 354 items, but that's actually including some of my solds, which are at the end of my listings. Just like that other page that we looked at, if you're looking at any sellers, sorry, I'll go down slower. So here are the items. This is in order. This, again, it's set for most recent. So I have it in order of, the listings I've just done. And when something sells, sorry, it might take a while to get down here. I should have shortened the thing, but anyway, okay, I'm going to go faster. You can always pop over to Ruby Lane, Pish Posh Vintage, if you want to look at the other things I have listed. But anyway, let's get down to the bottom and then go to page 2 and go down a little bit. So you see these are items I have on sale. So it has the little ruby red tag on the sale items. And if we get down a little further, slowly getting to my solds. Here we go. So you may recognize some of these things, or you will see them on my What Sold videos, or you've seen them in the last couple videos that I did. Okay, so this is they say sale pending. So what happens is once you make a sale, you send it, you ship it out, and because there's that 3-day return policy is I just kind of follow the tracking, and once in a while I'll go look at my sale pendings and I'll check the tracking and I'm like, okay, it's been delivered, it's been 3 days, everything is good, and then I finalize the sale. And then once you finalize the sale's done, and it'll go from saying sale pending to sold on here. So that's all this is. These are still things that are in transit, or I'm just kind of waiting the 3 days for the sales to be done. And then I can finalize them. So if we go down a little further, let's see, sale pending. That one actually, I should probably finalize that one. But here you can see now these down here say sold because these were older sales that had happened. And so yeah, like mid-century, certain things like this, they sold a lot quicker than I expected. I mean, Franciscan Starburst, that's going to be popular everywhere, but even like these little mid-century plastic coasters, right? Yeah, it was only $10. That's all they were really worth. But in my head, I bought those for Etsy years ago, never listed them. And I thought, really? Ruby Lane, I'm still fighting that preconceived idea about how it has to be like fancy and teacups and dolls and things like that. But just this mid-century coaster type thing sold within a couple days. And so you just have to kind of just put the stuff out there. And I'm really working on that next, is trying to just not put all the same types of things that other people might have listed on Ruby Lane, but just put the stuff that I like and go ahead and curate it the way that I like, and things that I think are a little bit unusual. And those things tend to sell really quick. Like this turtle hot pad, total kitschy, right? Just these lemon lime trivet slices and that horse that I showed you, the horse head creamer, right? They just kitschy whatever, and they sold fairly quickly because it's something that no one else is offering. So I think that's really a key to it as well. And anyway, yeah, I mean, I did pick up a little doll at a yard sale for $1 and found out some information about it and sold that. Look at 1980s, a Fisher Price Puffalump. That sold just fine. So yeah, sales have been pretty good on here. I can't complain. Another mid-century type thing, I would have thought only these two things. I would have definitely thought Etsy only. But anyway, so yeah, that's my little experience so far with Ruby Lane. What I want to do, let's see, let's go back up and just let me show you a couple more things. I don't want this video to be crazy long unless it already is. So my alerts, when I hit that, it tells me if I have open orders. And so that's where my sale pendings are. And then once I finalize them, and sometimes I get behind on doing that, but once I finalize them, then they go away. And that's where I get notified of any new orders. But I also get an email. I have it set up to get an email when something sells. So here, let me just show you Shop Owner's Home. So this is a place to access all the different parts of your shop. They have a thing here about special buyer discounts. They've made some changes recently about this, and I have not explored it all. And I think it's a place that you can set up like a coupon or a discount to your repeat buyers or things like that, or dealer to dealer type discounts. But anyway, we have a section on managing your items. So that's where you can hit add items and add some new items into your shop. You can do that from other places as well. We'll talk about the image gallery and the advanced image processing. This is where you can find a list of your items and you can modify. This is where your sales information, where your questions are, Here's your accounting, then your vacation settings, your banner background, your image backgrounds. Like I said, everybody can choose a little bit of a different background, but on the main pages, they'll just do white. Wish lists. You know what? We'll talk about wish lists in a minute. Shop announcements, where you can manage that. This is your search clicks if you want to pay for search, being in the search results. Featuring, there's promotions, events. This is where you would select your item for that monthly finds newsletter, or where you would add items to a sale along here. And this is a good spot to look at. You can find your FAQs here and also tutorials for shop owners. So you have a block buyer area. And then they have live support as well. I think I've only used that once. Something else I wanted to show you. Oh, manage reviews. So feedback, that's probably something I should mention. They do have a feedback system, but it's not super visible, and it's just done through a third party. So they use Trustpilot. So people, they really have to kind of hunt down your feedback, and hardly anybody leaves feedback. Now, I thought maybe if it's not me, or maybe it's a setting, I don't know. I've seen it on other people's stores, where right up here they'll have how many like Trustpilot reviews a person has. So maybe I can't see it because I'm looking at it as myself. I don't know how that works. Or maybe it's a setting that I could have it visible. But basically, you can go look at your reviews from there. So Trustpilot rating is 5 out of 5. I've only had 25 people leave a review. Okay, and they've all been 5 stars and positive, so that's great. But honestly, feedback is not a huge deal on Ruby Lane, which is another plus in its favor, I'm thinking. Okay, so last thing I'm going to share for today is buyers' wish lists. Okay, so as a buyer, you can put your things on wish lists. You can follow sellers. You can save items, different things like that. I have some sellers that I follow, mostly just to learn from and to see how they do things or what types of items they're selling. But you can look here at buyer's wish lists, and the one I click on the most is items on wish lists. And this is a list of the items in your shop and the last date they were added to somebody's wish list. And so this is the count. So like this bed sheet, 2 people have favorited it or like watching it. This little tureen, 1 person's watching, 3 people are watching this brooch. So I kind of keep an idea on how, it gives me an idea of how popular certain items are. And then when I run a sale, I come and look at the items that have people watching, because those people, when I change the price, or if I modify the item at all, or if I put it in one of those sales, then they will get notified that the item has changed or is on sale or things like that. So it's really worth it to do it to the items that have watchers. So that kind of helps you. And it kind of helps you see, some of these things on here, they're still on here, but they've sold already. Like this Joan Rivers necklace has 2 watchers, but it's already sold. So, but it's still on there because I have it sorted right now as far as last date added. Anyway, I think I'll stop there for now. So this is kind of a short, like I usually go here when I'm going to add an item, and when I'm dealing with anything with my photos and sales. So it's kind of a shortened form of that other shop owner's home. It's a quick place to get to some of these things. So Anyway, that's what I'm going to share with you today. So next video, we will go ahead and we will hit that add item button. No, you know what? First, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to open the shop. Okay, so opening the shop, you do have to get your shop approved, and you have to put 10 listings. You have to make 10 listings and let them look at them and see if you're a good fit for the website. Now that might seem annoying and it might seem kind of different than some of the other websites, but this is honestly how they keep Ruby Lane to be a nice vintage only type of site. So it doesn't bother me at all. So, okay, I'm gonna let you go. Go ahead, hit the like button if this was helpful to you at all. And go ahead and subscribe if you would like to see what's next in Ruby Lane, to see how easy it is to make a listing. It is, to me, it's much faster than once you get past your learning curve, it's much faster than most of the other sites I'm on. And yeah, and then I'll have another video probably after that that's just more tips and tricks and like maybe some of the more details about Ruby Lane that could help you make some sales. Okay, thanks for watching, and thanks everybody who made it this far, and we will see you next time.